Emma Reeves wiped grease from her calloused hands as she stared at the massive black helicopter that had just made an emergency landing in her family's wheat field, its rotors still spinning down with an expensive whir that seemed alien against the backdrop of rural Montana farmland. The billionaire tech mogul who climbed out was clearly frustrated, barking orders into his phone about missed meetings and corporate emergencies. But what stopped Emma cold wasn't his obvious wealth or the inconvenience of his unscheduled arrival. It was when she opened her father's old helicopter maintenance manual to help diagnose the engine trouble and found detailed technical specifications for this exact aircraft model, annotated in her dead father's handwriting with modifications that shouldn't exist, serial numbers that didn't match any civilian registry, and most shocking of all, a personal note tucked between the pages that read, "If Emma ever sees this bird, tell her the truth about Operation Nightfall and why they had to silence me." What Emma was about to discover would unravel a decades-old military conspiracy, expose her father's true identity as a classified military engineer, and thrust her into a dangerous world where powerful people would kill to keep their secrets buried. The morning had started like any other on the Reeves family farm, with Emma checking the irrigation systems before the Montana sun became too harsh to work outside. At 24, she had been running the 2,000-acre wheat operation single-handedly. Since her grandmother passed away 6 months earlier, leaving her completely alone in the world. Her parents had died in what authorities called a farming accident when she was 8. A tragic explosion in the equipment barn that destroyed not only their lives but most of their personal belongings and records. The helicopter's sudden appearance had sent her border collie, Scout, into a frenzy of protective barking as the aircraft descended toward the flattest section of her east field. Emma had watched from her porch as the sleek machine touched down, its black paint job and unmarked exterior suggesting this wasn't some typical medical or news helicopter. The pilot shut down the engines and climbed out, followed by a man in an expensive suit who was clearly agitated by the unscheduled stop. "Is there somewhere I can get cell service?" the man in the suit demanded as Emma approached across the field. He was tall, probably in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from never having to worry about money. His designer shoes were already collecting dust from the dry soil, and he looked entirely out of place against the backdrop of wheat stalks and farm equipment. "Cell towers about 10 miles east," Emma replied, noting the helicopter pilot's concerned expression as he examined the aircraft's engine compartment. "You having mechanical trouble?" The well-dressed man's irritation was palpable, something about a fuel system malfunction. "This is costing me millions in delayed meetings." He gestured dismissively toward the helicopter. "I'm Marcus Steinberg, by the way, CEO of Steinberg Dynamics. This delay is completely unacceptable." Emma had heard of Steinberg Dynamics, a major defense contractor that specialized in military technology and government contracts. The company had been in the news recently for landing a massive Pentagon deal worth billions. What she couldn't understand was why their CEO was flying around in an unmarked helicopter that looked more military than civilian. "Ma'am, you wouldn't happen to know anything about helicopter maintenance, would you?" the pilot asked, his voice carrying a slight desperation. He was younger than his passenger, maybe early 30s, with the kind of precise movements that suggested military training. "We've got a fuel injection problem that's beyond my field expertise." Emma almost said no automatically. She was just a wheat farmer after all, with no formal training in aircraft maintenance. But something made her hesitate. Her father had been mechanically gifted, able to fix anything with an engine, and he'd taught her the basics before his death. More importantly, she remembered the collection of technical manuals he'd kept in his workshop, including several related to aircraft systems that had always seemed oddly specific for a simple farmer. "I might have some reference materials that could help," she offered, surprising herself. "My father was good with engines." "Let me grab his manuals." The workshop behind their farmhouse had remained largely untouched since her father's death. Emma's grandmother had been too grief-stricken to sort through his belongings, and Emma herself had found it too painful to spend much time among his tools and projects. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through grimy windows. As she located the shelf where her father kept his technical documentation, most of the manuals were exactly what you'd expect from a farmer and mechanic: John Deere tractor specifications, small engine repair guides, basic electrical systems. But tucked between a diesel maintenance handbook and a welding reference guide was a thick, official-looking manual with a plain black cover. Emma pulled it free and felt her breath catch as she read the title: Advanced Rotorcraft Systems Maintenance and Modification Protocols. The manual was clearly military in origin, with classification stamps and official seals throughout its pages. What made Emma's hands tremble, however, was seeing her father's handwriting in the margins, detailed notes and observations written in the precise block letters she remembered from her childhood. How had a simple wheat farmer obtained classified military documentation? And why did he have such detailed knowledge of helicopter systems that he'd never worked on professionally? She flipped through the pages quickly, looking for information relevant to the helicopter outside. Near the middle of the manual, she found a section dedicated to fuel system diagnostics, complete with troubleshooting charts and repair procedures. Her father had made extensive notes here, including modifications and improvements to the standard systems described in the official text. But it was when she reached the section on specific aircraft models that Emma's world began to shift beneath her feet. There, in a subsection labeled Advanced Attack Helicopter Variants, was a detailed technical breakdown of the exact helicopter currently sitting in her wheat field. The specifications matched perfectly: engine configuration, fuel system layout, even the distinctive rotor design she'd observed during the landing. According to the manual, this aircraft was designated as a modified AH-64 Apache variant, prototype series. It was supposed to be a classified military aircraft, not something a civilian CEO should have access to. Her father's notes in this section were particularly extensive, including what appeared to be design improvements and system modifications that went far beyond standard maintenance procedures. Emma's hands shook as she continued reading. Her father hadn't just studied this aircraft. He'd apparently worked on it extensively. His notes referenced specific test flights, performance data, and engineering challenges that suggested intimate familiarity with the aircraft's development and deployment. For a man who was supposed to have been a simple farmer his entire adult life, the level of technical expertise demonstrated in these annotations was staggering. At the bottom of the page, describing the helicopter's advanced stealth modifications, her father had written a note that made Emma's blood run cold. Project Nightfall modifications complete. Recommend immediate classified status upgrade. Cannot allow civilian oversight of this technology. Chief Engineer J. Reeves, March 15, 2005. Chief Engineer J. Reeves. Her father's name was Jonathan Reeves, and according to this manual, he'd been the chief engineer on some kind of classified military project involving the exact helicopter that had just landed in her field. The date of the note was just 3 years before her parents' supposed farming accident, which now seemed far less accidental than she'd always believed. Emma sank into her father's old workshop chair, the manual heavy in her lap as she tried to process the implications. Her father hadn't been a farmer. He'd been a military engineer working on classified aircraft projects. The man she'd thought she knew, the gentle parent who'd taught her to drive the tractor and fix broken fence posts, had apparently been living a completely fabricated life. But why? Why would a military engineer pretend to be a wheat farmer? Why would he move to rural Montana and spend years maintaining an elaborate cover story? And most importantly, what had happened to make him write that cryptic warning about Operation Nightfall? She turned the page and found something that made her gasp aloud. Tucked between the technical specifications and a detailed wiring diagram was a small, handwritten note on personal stationery. The paper was yellowed with age and the ink had faded slightly, but her father's distinctive handwriting was unmistakable. "Emma, if you're reading this, it means something has happened to me and your mother. I pray you never have to find this manual, but if you do, you need to know the truth about who I really was and why we had to disappear from our old life." Helicopter described in these pages represents technology that could change the balance of power in military conflicts around the world. I helped design its stealth capabilities and advanced weapon systems, believing I was serving my country. I was wrong. The people funding this project had other plans, and when I tried to expose them, they made it clear that my family would pay the price for my conscience. We faked our deaths and started over as farmers, hoping to give you a normal childhood away from the people who wanted us dead. If this aircraft ever surfaces near you, it means they've found us or someone is trying to restart the project. Trust no one in positions of power. The conspiracy goes higher than you can imagine. Find Marcus Steinberg and ask him about Operation Nightfall. He knows what happened to the original team. Be careful, sweetheart. They killed for this technology once, and they won't hesitate to do it again. All my love, Dad. Emma read the note 3 times before its full meaning sank in. Her parents hadn't died in a farming accident. They'd been murdered by people connected to this helicopter project, people who had somehow tracked them down despite their efforts to disappear. And now, 15 years later, Marcus Steinberg himself was sitting in her wheat field with the very aircraft that had cost her parents their lives. The irony was almost too much to comprehend. The CEO, who was impatiently pacing outside her farmhouse, complaining about delayed meetings and lost profits, was apparently connected to the conspiracy that had orphaned her. He'd asked for her help fixing his helicopter, not knowing that she was the daughter of the man who designed its most classified systems. Emma's first instinct was to run. Her father's warning was clear. These people were dangerous, and they'd already killed to protect their secrets. But as she sat in her father's workshop, surrounded by the tools and projects that represented his attempt to build a peaceful life for his family, she felt something stronger than fear beginning to build inside her. Anger. Pure, righteous anger. At the people who had stolen her childhood, murdered her parents, and forced her to grow up believing she was alone in the world. They'd taken everything from her once, and now one of them had the audacity to land on her property and demand her help. She looked out the workshop window toward the helicopter, where Marcus Steinberg was still pacing impatiently while the pilot continued his futile examination of the engine compartment. They had no idea who she was or what she now knew. For the first time since her father's death, Emma Reeves had an advantage over the people who had destroyed her family. The question was what to do with it. Emma carefully closed the manual and slipped her father's note into her pocket. Whatever happened next, she was going to get answers about Operation Nightfall and the conspiracy that had cost her parents their lives. Marcus Steinberg thought he was dealing with a simple farm girl who might be able to help him get back to his important meetings. He was about to discover just how wrong he could be. Emma walked back toward the helicopter with her father's manual tucked under her arm, her mind racing with possibilities. The weight of the classified documentation felt heavy against her ribs, but she forced herself to maintain the demeanor of a helpful farm girl who might know something about engines. Marcus Steinberg was still barking orders into his phone, his frustration mounting with each failed attempt to reach his corporate headquarters. "Any luck with those manuals?" the pilot asked hopefully as Emma approached. Up close, she could see the stress lines around his eyes and the way his hands shook slightly as he wiped sweat from his forehead. Whatever was wrong with the helicopter, it was clearly beyond his expertise to fix. "I found something that might help," Emma replied carefully, opening the manual to a page that showed basic fuel system diagnostics while keeping the more sensitive sections hidden. "My father worked on a lot of different engines over the years, What exactly are the symptoms you're seeing? The pilot, who introduced himself as Captain Rodriguez, launched into a detailed description of the helicopter's problems. The fuel injection system was delivering inconsistent pressure, causing engine power fluctuations that made sustained flight dangerous. The onboard diagnostics were showing error codes that didn't match anything in his standard maintenance protocols. As Rodriguez spoke, Emma followed along in her father's manual, noting how perfectly his description matched the troubleshooting scenarios outlined in the classified documentation. Her father had anticipated exactly these problems and had developed solutions that went far beyond standard repair procedures. The modifications he designed weren't just improvements. They were completely revolutionary approaches to helicopter engineering. The strange thing is, Rodriguez continued, this bird was supposed to be a standard civilian transport helicopter when Mr. Steinberg acquired it. But some of the systems I'm seeing under the hood don't match any civilian specifications I've ever encountered. It's like someone completely rebuilt the engine with military-grade components. Emma's pulse quickened. Rodriguez was inadvertently confirming what her father's notes had already told her. This helicopter was far from civilian. But the pilot's confusion suggested he might not be part of the conspiracy that had killed her parents. If Steinberg had brought along an innocent pilot, it might mean she could find an ally in this situation. Could you show me the specific components you're concerned about? Emma asked, following Rodriguez to the helicopter's engine compartment. As he pointed out various systems that didn't match his training, Emma cross-referenced them with her father's manual. Every modification he described was detailed in the classified documentation, complete with her father's engineering notes about performance improvements and potential failure points. This fuel pump assembly, for instance, Rodriguez said, indicating a complex mechanism that looked far more sophisticated than anything belonging on a civilian aircraft. I've never seen anything like it. The pressure tolerances are way beyond normal specifications, and there are backup systems built into backup systems. It's like this thing was designed for combat operations. Emma nodded while internally marveling at her father's engineering genius. According to his notes, the fuel system he'd designed could maintain optimal performance even after sustaining significant battle damage. The redundant backups Rodriguez had noticed weren't just precautions. They were military necessities for an aircraft that might need to continue flying after taking enemy fire. Mr. Steinberg, Rodriguez called out, could you come take a look at this? I think Ms. Reeves might have found some useful information in her father's documentation. Steinberg ended his phone call with an irritated sigh and approached the helicopter. As he drew closer, Emma studied his face carefully, searching for any sign that he might recognize her name or see her resemblance to her father, but his expression remained focused entirely on his immediate problem, getting his helicopter back in the air so he could return to his business empire. What have you found? Steinberg demanded, his tone making it clear that he expected quick solutions rather than detailed explanations. Emma opened her father's manual to a diagnostic flowchart that she hoped would help identify the immediate problem without revealing the classified nature of the documentation. According to this reference guide, fuel pressure inconsistencies in advanced helicopter systems are often caused by contamination in the primary injection filters. Have you had the filters inspected recently? Rodriguez shook his head. That's beyond my certification level. This aircraft requires specialized maintenance protocols that I don't have access to. Steinberg's expression darkened. What do you mean, specialized protocols? This is supposed to be a standard executive transport helicopter. I was assured that any qualified pilot could handle basic maintenance requirements. Emma saw an opportunity to probe deeper into Steinberg's knowledge while maintaining her cover as an innocent farm girl. Some of these technical specifications seem pretty advanced for civilian use, she commented, pointing to a section of the Manual that described military-grade navigation systems. Are you sure this helicopter wasn't originally designed for government operations? For just a moment, Emma saw something flicker across Steinberg's face. Recognition, perhaps, or concern that she was asking too many questions. But his response was smoothly professional, the kind of deflection that came from years of corporate damage control. I acquired this aircraft through a government surplus auction, he said carefully. It's possible that some military components remained in place when it was converted for civilian use. The important thing is getting it operational again so we can continue our flight. The lie was so polished that Emma almost admired its construction. But her father's manual contained detailed records of this specific aircraft's development timeline. And there was no mention of any government surplus auction. According to the classified documentation, this helicopter had never been intended for civilian use at all. It was a prototype that should have remained in military custody indefinitely. I might be able to help with the maintenance, Emma offered, her heart pounding as she prepared to take the biggest risk of her life. Some of these procedures look similar to work my father did on agricultural equipment. The principles are probably transferable. Rodriguez looked hopeful, but Steinberg appeared skeptical. With all due respect, Miss Reeves, this is a multi-million-dollar aircraft with extremely sophisticated systems. I'm not sure that farm equipment experience translates to aerospace engineering. Emma felt a surge of anger at his condescending tone, but she forced herself to remain calm. I understand your concerns, but I'm probably your best option out here. The nearest helicopter maintenance facility is over 200 miles away. And according to your pilot, this aircraft needs specialized knowledge that most civilian mechanics won't have. The truth of her statement was undeniable. They were in the middle of rural Montana, hours away from any major city, with a helicopter that required expertise that didn't officially exist outside of classified military programs. Emma was literally the only person within hundreds of miles who had access to the technical knowledge needed to fix their problem. Steinberg consulted his expensive watch and weighed his options. How long would this take? I have board meetings starting in 4 hours that cannot be delayed. That depends on what we find when we start diagnostics, Emma replied, opening her father's manual to a troubleshooting section. But if the problem is what I think it is, we should be able to get you airborne within a couple of hours. What Emma didn't mention was that her father's notes included detailed procedures for disabling various aircraft systems in ways that would be nearly impossible to detect. If she discovered that Steinberg was indeed responsible for her parents' deaths, she would have the technical knowledge to ensure his helicopter never flew again. Fine, Steinberg agreed reluctantly. But I want to observe the entire process. This aircraft contains sensitive equipment that requires careful handling. Emma nodded, understanding that he wanted to watch her work to ensure she didn't discover anything she shouldn't. What he didn't realize was that she already knew far more about his sensitive equipment than he could imagine. I'll need to access the engine compartment more thoroughly, Emma explained, pulling tools from the helicopter's maintenance kit. Captain Rodriguez, could you help me remove these access panels? As they began the actual repair work, Emma carefully followed her father's diagnostic procedures, while keeping the manual positioned so that Steinberg couldn't see the classified markings or her father's handwritten notes. The fuel system problems were exactly what the documentation had predicted, caused by a design flaw that her father had identified, but apparently hadn't had time to correct before he was forced to disappear. Working with her hands gave Emma time to think about her next moves. She could fix the helicopter and send Steinberg on his way, but that would waste the opportunity to learn more about Operation Nightfall and the conspiracy that had destroyed her family. Alternatively, she could try to extract information from him while maintaining her cover as an innocent farm girl. This is fascinating technology, Emma commented as she worked on the fuel injection system. I've never seen engineering this sophisticated. Your company must have some incredible contracts to justify aircraft this advanced. Steinberg's response was carefully neutral. Steinberg Dynamics works on various projects for government agencies. Many of our contracts involve developing next-generation technology for national security purposes. Emma nodded as if this explanation satisfied her curiosity, but internally she was cataloging every word. Her father's manual contained references to Steinberg Dynamics throughout its pages, suggesting that the company had been heavily involved in Operation Nightfall from its inception. If Steinberg was here personally, rather than sending subordinates, it meant that this helicopter's appearance was more significant than a simple mechanical failure. "There," Emma announced, completing the fuel system repair according to her father's specifications. That should resolve the pressure inconsistencies. But I'd recommend having the entire fuel system professionally inspected when you reach your destination. Some of these components are showing signs of wear that could cause future problems. Rodriguez ran through the startup procedures, and the helicopter's engine came to life with a smooth purr that had been absent during their emergency landing. The diagnostic system showed green across the board, confirming that Emma's repairs had been successful. "Impressive work," Steinberg admitted, though his tone suggested he was more concerned than pleased by her technical competence. "Where exactly did your father learn to work on systems this complex?" Emma's heart raced as she realized this was her opportunity to probe for information while maintaining her cover. "He never talked much about his background," she replied carefully. "But he had a lot of technical manuals and seemed to understand engineering principles better than most farmers. He might have had military experience before he started farming." Steinberg's expression sharpened with what Emma recognized as suspicion. "Military experience? What branch of service?" "I'm not sure," Emma lied smoothly. "He died when I was young, and my grandmother wasn't very talkative about family history." "Why do you ask?" For a moment, Steinberg seemed to be wrestling with some internal debate. Emma held her breath, wondering if he was about to reveal something important, or if he was simply trying to decide how much of a security risk she represented. "No particular reason," he finally replied, but his casual tone was clearly forced. "I'm just curious about the background of someone with such impressive technical skills." Emma sensed that she had pushed as far as she safely could without arousing more suspicion. But as she watched Steinberg and Rodriguez prepare for departure, she realized that her father's warning had been prophetic. The conspiracy was still active, and the people responsible for her parents' deaths were still in positions of power. The question now was whether she had the courage to follow her father's cryptic instructions about finding the truth behind Operation Nightfall, even if it meant putting her own life at risk. As the helicopter lifted off from her wheat field, Emma watched through the kitchen window while pretending to wash dishes, her mind churning with everything she had learned. The aircraft rose smoothly into the Montana sky, its repaired engine purring with the precision her father had engineered years ago. But instead of relief at seeing her unexpected visitors depart, Emma felt a growing sense of unease. Steinberg's questions about her father's military background had been too pointed, too specific for casual conversation. She waited until the helicopter disappeared completely over the eastern horizon before returning to her father's workshop. The classified manual lay open on his workbench exactly where she had left it, its pages filled with technical specifications that painted a picture of a man she had never truly known. Emma settled into her father's chair and began reading more carefully, searching for clues about Operation Nightfall and the conspiracy that had destroyed her family. The deeper she delved into the documentation, the more complex the picture became. Her father hadn't just been a military engineer. He had been the lead designer on what appeared to be one of the most advanced helicopter projects in history. The aircraft that had just departed from her farm represented technology that was decades ahead of anything publicly acknowledged by the military or defense contractors. According to the technical specifications, The helicopter combined stealth capabilities with weapon systems that could operate autonomously, guided by artificial intelligence that her father had helped develop. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just an advanced military vehicle. It was a weapon that could carry out targeted assassinations without direct human control, leaving no trail back to whoever had deployed it. Emma found a section in the manual labeled Operational Deployment Records that made her blood run cold. The entries, written in her father's precise handwriting, documented test missions that had taken place around the world between 2003 and 2006. Each mission was identified only by a numerical code, but the results were described in clinical terms. That left no doubt about the helicopter's true purpose. Mission 047. Target eliminated with precision strike. No civilian casualties. Operation completed within acceptable parameters. Mission 051. Multiple targets engaged simultaneously. Advanced AI targeting system performed flawlessly. Recommend expanded deployment authorization. Mission 063. Long-range infiltration successful. Target eliminated without alerting local security forces. Extraction completed undetected. The list continued for pages, documenting what appeared to be a systematic campaign of assassinations, carried out by aircraft identical to the one that had just been in her wheat field. Each mission report was signed by her father as chief engineer, but the final entry showed a troubling change in tone. Mission 078. Serious concerns about target selection protocols. Requesting immediate review of authorization procedures. Current deployment parameters exceed original mission specifications. Mission 082. Target appears to have been civilian journalist, investigating defense contractor irregularities, demanding full operational review and suspension of autonomous targeting protocols. Mission 085. Project compromised. Unauthorized personnel have gained access to classified specifications. Recommend immediate shutdown and secure destruction of all related materials. The final entry was dated just 6 months before her parents' supposed farming accident. Personal note: I cannot continue participating in this program. The technology I helped create is being used for purposes that violate every principle I swore to uphold. I am resigning from Operation Nightfall effective immediately and will be reporting my concerns through appropriate channels. If anything happens to me or my family, investigate Steinberg dynamics and their connections to Black Ops funding. Emma leaned back in her father's chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she had discovered. Her father hadn't just been a whistleblower. He had been trying to expose what amounted to a private assassination program operated by defense contractors, outside of official military oversight. The helicopter technology he had developed was being used to eliminate people who posed threats to powerful interests. And when he tried to stop it, he became a target himself. Her phone rang, startling her from her dark thoughts. The caller ID showed an unknown number with a Montana area code. Emma hesitated before answering, remembering her father's warnings about trusting no one in positions of power. "Hello?" She answered cautiously. "Miss Reeves, this is Captain Rodriguez. I wanted to thank you again for your help with the helicopter repairs." His voice sounded strained, almost nervous. "I was wondering if we could meet somewhere private to discuss what happened today. There are some things about that aircraft that don't add up, and I think you might have insights that could help me understand what I've gotten myself involved in." Emma's pulse quickened. Rodriguez's call could be a trap, but his confusion about the helicopter's specifications had seemed genuine. If he truly was an innocent pilot who had stumbled into something beyond his understanding, he might be her only potential ally in unraveling the conspiracy. "Where did you have in mind?" Emma asked carefully. "There's a truck stop about 20 miles east of your farm, right off Highway 2. It's public enough to be safe, but private enough that we can talk freely. Could you meet me there in an hour? Emma agreed, but as she hung up the phone, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was making a decision that would change her life forever. Her father's manual contained enough evidence to expose Operation Nightfall and bring down the people responsible for her parents' deaths. But using that evidence would also put her directly in the crosshairs of a conspiracy that had already demonstrated its willingness to kill Dot before leaving for the meeting. Emma photographed every page of her father's manual with her phone, uploading the images to a secure cloud storage account that she had created years ago for backing up farm records. If something happened to her, she wanted to ensure that the evidence would survive. She also wrote a detailed letter explaining everything she had discovered, sealed it in an envelope, and hid it in a location where it would eventually be found. Truck stop was exactly as Rodriguez had described, busy enough to provide cover, but with quiet corners where they could talk without being overheard. Emma found him sitting in a corner booth, still wearing his pilot's uniform, but looking haggard and worried. His hands shook slightly as he lifted his coffee cup, and his eyes constantly scanned the room as if he expected trouble. "Thank you for coming," he said as Emma slid into the booth across from him. "I wasn't sure you would, especially after some of the questions Mr. Steinberg was asking during our flight back to his corporate headquarters." Emma's stomach tightened. "What kind of questions?" Rodriguez pulled out a small notebook and consulted his handwritten notes. He wanted to know everything about you. Your full name, how long your family had owned the farm, whether you had any military connections, what you knew about helicopter maintenance. He was particularly interested in your father's background and whether you had any other family members who might have technical knowledge. The implications were clear. Steinberg suspected that Emma was more than she appeared to be, and he was gathering information to determine whether she posed a threat to his operations. The fact that he was conducting this investigation so quickly suggested that Operation Nightfall was still active and that the people involved were prepared to take immediate action against potential problems. "There's more," Rodriguez continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "After we landed, I overheard part of a phone conversation between Steinberg and someone he called Control. He mentioned something about a Reeves situation that needed to be handled with extreme prejudice. Those are military terms, Miss Reeves. The kind of language used when discussing elimination of targets." Emma felt ice forming in her veins. Her worst fears were being confirmed. By helping repair the helicopter, she had inadvertently revealed herself to the very people who had murdered her parents. Now they knew where she was, and they were already planning to eliminate her just as they had eliminated her father. "Why are you telling me this?" Emma asked. "If Steinberg is your employer, warning me could put you at risk too." Rodriguez's expression hardened. "Because I joined the military to protect innocent people, not to help billionaires cover up their crimes. When I signed on as Steinberg's pilot, I thought I was taking a legitimate corporate job. But that helicopter isn't civilian equipment. And the modifications you repaired today aren't standard features. I've been flying a weapon, and I think I've been helping transport people who use it for purposes I don't want to think about." Emma made a decision that she knew would change everything. "Captain Rodriguez, what would you say if I told you that my father was the chief engineer who designed that helicopter, and that he was murdered along with my mother because he tried to expose the program it was built for?" Rodriguez stared at her in shock. "I'd say that explains why you knew exactly how to fix systems that shouldn't exist on any civilian aircraft. And I'd ask what we can do to stop them before they kill you too." Emma pulled out her phone and showed Rodriguez one of the photographs she had taken of her father's manual. The page displayed detailed specifications for the helicopter's weapons systems, including targeting protocols and engagement parameters that left no doubt about the aircraft's true purpose. "This is classified documentation that my father kept hidden for 15 years, Emma explained. "It contains evidence of a private assassination program called Operation Nightfall that's been operating outside of official military oversight. The helicopter you've been flying has been used to eliminate journalists, investigators, and anyone else who gets too close to exposing the conspiracy. Rodriguez studied the technical specifications with the trained eye of a military pilot. His face grew pale as he recognized systems and capabilities that went far beyond anything he had imagined. This is impossible. Technology like this would require approval from the highest levels of government. There's no way a private company could develop and deploy weapon systems this advanced without official authorization. Unless they had help from people inside the government, Emma replied. My father's notes mention funding sources that trace back to black budget operations and defense contractors with connections to intelligence agencies. Operation Nightfall wasn't authorized by official channels because it was designed to operate outside of them. Rodriguez closed his eyes and rubbed his temples as if fighting a headache. Miss Reeves, if what you're telling me is true, then I've been complicit in war crimes. Every flight I've made for Steinberg could have been transporting people to carry out murders. Emma reached across the table and touched his hand gently. You didn't know. But now that you do, you have a choice. You can walk away and pretend this conversation never happened. Or you can help me expose the truth about what happened to my parents and how many other people have died because of this program. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, staring out the truck stop window at the endless Montana landscape. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the conviction of a man who had found his moral center. My oath as a military officer was to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I think Steinberg and his associates qualify. As domestic enemies, he looked directly at Emma. What do you need me to do? Emma felt a surge of hope for the first time since discovering her father's manual. She wasn't alone in this fight anymore. I need access to Steinberg's operations. Flight records, communication logs, anything that can help us trace the scope of Operation Nightfall and identify everyone involved in the conspiracy. Rodriguez nodded grimly. I can get you access, but it will be dangerous. If Steinberg suspects that I'm working against him, we'll both become targets for elimination. We're already targets, Emma pointed out. The only question is whether we're going to wait for them to come after us, or whether we're going to take the fight to them first. As they finalized their plans for infiltrating Steinberg's corporate headquarters, Emma thought about her father's final note and his warning about the conspiracy reaching higher than she could imagine. She was about to discover just how right he had been. 3 days after her meeting with Rodriguez, Emma found herself crouched in the back of a catering van, approaching the Steinberg Dynamics corporate complex outside Billings, Montana. The sprawling facility looked more like a military installation than a civilian business, with multiple security checkpoints, razor wire fencing, and surveillance cameras positioned at strategic intervals throughout the compound. Rodriguez had arranged for her to pose as part of the catering crew for a high-level board meeting, providing the perfect cover for accessing areas of the building that would normally be off-limits to outsiders. Remember, Rodriguez whispered. As the van passed through the main security gate, Steinberg's private office is on the 20th floor, northeast corner. His personal files are kept in a vault behind his desk that requires both a keycard and biometric scan. I've disabled the motion sensors in the elevator shaft, but you'll only have about 30 minutes before the next security sweep. Emma adjusted the catering uniform that concealed the small camera and recording equipment Rodriguez had provided. Her heart pounded as she considered the magnitude of what they were attempting. Breaking into the corporate headquarters of a major defense contractor was a federal crime that could land her in prison for decades. But the evidence they needed to expose Operation Nightfall was worth the risk. The van pulled up to the service entrance, where uniformed security guards checked identification and searched the catering supplies with practiced efficiency. Emma kept her expression neutral as a guard examined her fake credentials, knowing that any sign of nervousness could expose their entire operation. After what felt like an eternity, the guards waved them through into the building's loading dock. Inside, the Steinberg Dynamics facility was a maze of sterile corridors and secure laboratories that reinforced Emma's suspicion that the company was involved in projects far beyond civilian technology development. Through reinforced glass windows, she caught glimpses of aircraft components and weapon systems that looked decades ahead of anything she had seen in her father's manual. The scope of Steinberg's operations was clearly much larger than Operation Nightfall alone. The board meeting is scheduled to begin in Conference Room A on the 15th floor, the catering supervisor explained to his crew. We'll set up the lunch service there first, then handle the executive dining room on the 18th floor. Stay in groups, follow your assigned routes, and don't deviate from the schedule for any reason. Emma nodded along with the other catering staff while mentally reviewing the building layout Rodriguez had provided. Getting to Steinberg's office would require separating from the group during the lunch service and using the maintenance elevators to access the upper floors without triggering additional security protocols. The timing would have to be perfect. As they prepared the catering equipment for transport to the conference room, Emma overheard two security guards discussing recent changes to the facility's protocols. Ever since the boss got back from that emergency landing in the wheat fields, he's been paranoid about security leaks, one guard muttered to his partner. He's ordered background checks on everyone who's had access to the facility in the past month, including maintenance staff and contractors. Emma's blood ran cold. Steinberg's investigation was more extensive than Rodriguez had realized, and it was only a matter of time before they discovered the connection between the helicopters, emergency landing, and Emma's true identity. Their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. The conference room on the 15th floor was filled with men and women in expensive suits discussing what appeared to be budget allocations for various classified projects. Emma moved quietly around the room, serving refreshments while listening to fragments of conversation that confirmed her worst fears about the scope of Steinberg's operations. The Yemen operation exceeded all performance parameters, a woman with silver hair was saying as she reviewed a tablet displaying statistical data. 3 targets eliminated with 0 collateral damage and no attribution to any government entity. The client is requesting expanded deployment for the Syria campaign. What about the journalist situation in Eastern Europe? Asked a man with a thick German accent. The Prague incident generated more media attention than anticipated. We may need to accelerate the timeline for containment operations. Emma's hands trembled as she poured coffee for the board members, realizing that she was listening to people casually discussing assassination campaigns being carried out around the world. Operation Nightfall wasn't just active. It had evolved into a global enterprise that was eliminating targets for multiple clients, while maintaining complete deniability for the governments and corporations that employed their services. The Reeves matter requires immediate attention, Steinberg announced as he entered the conference room, his voice cutting through the other conversations. Our intelligence analysis indicates a significant security breach related to classified technical documentation. I want a full investigation and complete resolution within 72 hours. Emma forced herself to continue serving refreshments while fighting the urge to flee. Steinberg's timeline meant that she had less than 3 days before they identified her as Jonathan Reeves' daughter and moved to eliminate her. Whatever evidence she hoped to gather from his office, she needed to find it immediately. During the lunch break, Emma slipped away from the catering group and made her way to the maintenance elevator Rodriguez had identified. The keycard he had provided worked perfectly, and within minutes she was ascending toward the 20th floor and Steinberg's private office. The elevator shaft was silent except for the mechanical whir of motors and cables, but Emma's pulse thundered in her ears as she prepared for the most dangerous part of their operation. Steinberg's office occupied the entire northeast corner of the 20th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the Montana landscape. The space was decorated with military memorabilia and photographs showing Steinberg meeting with high-ranking government officials from around the world. But Emma's attention was focused on the vault built into the wall behind his massive oak desk. Rodriguez's intelligence had been accurate. The vault required both a keycard and biometric scan to open, but he had provided her with a device designed to bypass both security measures. Emma connected the electronic override to the vault's control panel and waited anxiously as it worked to crack the access codes. After several tense minutes, the vault's heavy door swung open with a soft hydraulic hiss. Inside, Emma found exactly what she had hoped for: rows of file folders containing documentation related to Operation Nightfall and its evolution into a global assassination program. She began photographing everything as quickly as possible, knowing that her 30-minute window was rapidly closing. The files revealed the staggering scope of Steinberg's operations. Operation Nightfall had been just the beginning of a comprehensive program that now included multiple aircraft, teams of operators, and client contracts worth billions of dollars. The target lists included journalists investigating defense contractor corruption, environmental activists opposing corporate interests, political dissidents in authoritarian regimes, and business executives who threatened established power structures. One file folder was labeled Terminated Personnel and contained photographs and biographical information about people who had been eliminated for threatening the program's security. Emma's breath caught as she found her parents' information near the front of the file. Her father's photograph was accompanied by detailed notes about his attempts to expose Operation Nightfall and the decision to eliminate him, along with her mother, to prevent any future security breaches. But the most shocking discovery was a recent addition to the file: a photograph of Emma herself, taken during the helicopter repair 3 days earlier. Underneath her picture was a notation that made her blood run cold. Primary threat. Possesses technical knowledge and potential access to classified documentation. Recommend immediate termination authorization. Emma photographed the entire file with shaking hands, knowing that she was documenting her own death warrant. Steinberg wasn't just investigating her background. He had already decided that she needed to be eliminated. The only question was when and how they would carry out the assassination. As she prepared to close the vault and escape from the building, Emma heard footsteps in the corridor outside Steinberg's office. She quickly gathered the files and sealed the vault, but the footsteps were getting closer. Through the office windows, she could see security guards conducting an unscheduled patrol of the executive floors. Emma's mind raced as she searched for an escape route. The maintenance elevator would take too long, and the main elevators were certainly being monitored. Her only option was the emergency stairwell, but reaching it would require crossing an open area, where she might be spotted by the approaching guards. She waited until the footsteps passed Steinberg's office, then quietly opened the door and slipped into the corridor. The stairwell entrance was only 50 feet away, but the distance seemed like miles as Emma fought to maintain the casual pace of a catering worker who belonged in the building. "Hey, you!" A voice called out behind her. "Stop right there." Emma's cover was blown. She abandoned all pretense of belonging in the building and ran for the stairwell as security alarms began wailing throughout the facility. Behind her, she could hear guards shouting orders and coordinating their response to what they clearly viewed as a major security breach. The emergency stairwell was a concrete shaft that seemed to stretch endlessly downward. Emma took the stairs, 3 at a time, her catering uniform hampering her movement as she descended toward the ground floor. Above her, she could hear the heavy footsteps of pursuing guards echoing through the stairwell. By the time Emma reached the ground floor, the entire building was in lockdown. Security teams were stationed at every exit, and she could see through the stairwell window that additional guards were surrounding the building's perimeter. Her original escape plan was completely compromised, but Rodriguez had anticipated this possibility. Hidden in the building's basement was a maintenance tunnel that connected to the storm drain system, providing an alternate escape route that bypassed the facility's perimeter security. Emma just had to reach the basement without being captured by the teams that were systematically searching every floor. She descended below the ground floor into the basement levels, where the building's mechanical systems filled the air with the constant hum of ventilation fans and electrical equipment. The maintenance tunnel entrance was hidden behind a false wall in the boiler room, accessible only to someone who knew exactly where to look. Emma found the concealed entrance and squeezed through into a narrow tunnel that smelled of damp concrete and industrial lubricants. Behind her, she could hear security teams beginning their basement search, their flashlight beams probing every corner and crevice. She crawled through the tunnel as quickly as possible, knowing that discovery would mean certain death. The tunnel seemed to stretch for miles before finally opening into a larger storm drain that carried runoff from the corporate complex toward the nearby river. Emma emerged into daylight at a culvert hidden among trees and undergrowth, her catering uniform torn and stained from the underground journey. She had escaped with evidence that could expose Operation Nightfall and bring down the conspiracy that had murdered her parents. But she also knew that Steinberg and his associates would stop at nothing to silence her before she could reveal what she had discovered. The real battle was just beginning. Emma emerged from the storm drain 2 miles from the Steinberg Dynamics complex, her torn catering uniform clinging to her body as she stumbled through dense undergrowth toward the abandoned grain elevator where Rodriguez had arranged to meet her. Every shadow seemed to conceal potential threats, and the sound of distant helicopter rotors made her heart race with the knowledge that Steinberg's people were already mobilizing to hunt her down. The evidence she had photographed in his vault was explosive enough to destroy the conspiracy that had murdered her parents, but only if she could survive long enough to get it to the right people. The grain elevator had been abandoned for decades, its rusted metal structure rising like a skeletal monument against the Montana sky. Rodriguez's pickup truck was hidden behind the building, but there was no sign of the pilot himself. Emma approached cautiously, remembering her father's warnings about trusting anyone when powerful forces were involved. The facility's security breach would have been discovered by now, and Steinberg would be demanding answers about how an unauthorized person had accessed his private vault. Rodriguez? Emma called softly as she circled the grain elevator, her voice barely audible above the wind whistling through the rusted metal framework. The silence that greeted her was ominous, suggesting that something had gone wrong with their carefully planned escape. A muffled sound from inside the grain elevator made Emma freeze. It could have been the wind moving debris, but it might also have been someone in distress. Against her better judgment, she found a gap in the deteriorated metal siding and squeezed through into the building's dark interior. Rodriguez was tied to one of the support pillars, blood trickling from a cut above, his left eye and duct tape covering his mouth. His eyes widened with alarm when he saw Emma, and he shook his head frantically while making muffled sounds of warning. Emma realized too late that his capture meant their entire operation had been compromised. "Miss Emma Reeves," a voice said. Behind her, smooth and cultured with just a hint of an accent she couldn't identify. "Or should I say Sophia Nightfall? That was your father's pet name for you, wasn't it? The little girl who would never see the darkness he was helping to create." Emma spun around to find herself facing a woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed, in a business suit that looked completely out of place in the abandoned grain elevator. Her silver hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her cold gray eyes suggested someone who had spent years making life-and-death decisions without emotional involvement. "I'm Dr. Victoria Ashford," the woman continued, stepping closer with the confidence of someone who held all the advantages. "Director of Special Operations for the Blackwater Strategic Group. We're the people who actually run Operation Nightfall." while Marcus Steinberg provides the public face and the convenient scapegoat should exposure become unavoidable. Emma's mind raced as she processed this revelation. Steinberg wasn't the mastermind behind the conspiracy. He was just another layer of protection for the real power structure that controlled the assassination program. Dr. Ashford represented forces that operated at levels far above corporate executives and defense contractors. Your father was a brilliant engineer, Dr. Ashford said conversationally, as if discussing the weather rather than murder. But he lacked the vision to understand what he was creating. The helicopter technology he developed wasn't just a weapon. It was the foundation for a new form of governance, a system where problematic individuals could be eliminated quietly and efficiently, without the messy complications of legal proceedings or democratic oversight. Emma backed toward the grain elevator's far wall, searching for another exit while keeping her eyes on Dr. Ashford. The woman seemed to be in no hurry to conclude their confrontation, suggesting that she wanted information rather than immediate elimination. What happened to my parents wasn't personal, Dr. Ashford continued. It was simply a business decision. Your father threatened the stability of a program that serves vital national security interests. When negotiation and intimidation failed to change his position, elimination became the only viable option. National security? Emma spat, her fear transforming into anger. You're talking about assassination campaigns that target journalists and activists. That's not national security. That's fascism. Dr. Ashford's smile was thin and predatory. Such a naive perspective. Do you really believe that democracy can function when investigative journalists expose classified operations to hostile foreign governments? Can environmental activists be allowed to sabotage energy infrastructure during times of international crisis? The system we've created eliminates threats before they can damage critical national interests. Emma realized that Dr. Ashford genuinely believed she was serving her country by operating an extrajudicial killing program. The woman's calm rationalization of murder suggested a level of institutional corruption that went far beyond corporate greed or personal ambition. Where are the files? Dr. Ashford asked, her tone becoming more businesslike. The photographs you took from Steinberg's vault contain information that could compromise operations spanning multiple continents. That data needs to be recovered and secured before it falls into the wrong hands. Emma's phone, hidden in her pocket, contained the evidence that could expose the entire conspiracy. But she also knew that surrendering it would sign her own death warrant and ensure that her parents' murders would never be avenged. I've already uploaded everything to multiple secure servers, Emma lied smoothly. Kill me, and the information goes public automatically. You'll have news organizations around the world broadcasting the details of Operation Nightfall within hours. Dr. Ashford's expression darkened with what might have been respect for Emma's tactical thinking. An interesting bluff, but unnecessary. We're not going to kill you, Miss Reeves. We're going to offer you the same choice we offered your father. Join the program willingly, or watch everyone you care about suffer the consequences of your defiance. Emma's blood ran cold as she understood the implied threat. Dr. Ashford wasn't just talking about eliminating Emma. She was threatening Rodriguez and anyone else who might have knowledge of the conspiracy. Your father's engineering expertise made him too valuable to simply eliminate, Dr. Ashford explained. We spent months trying to convince him that Operation Nightfall served legitimate purposes. When he refused to see reason, we had to demonstrate the consequences of his intransigence. Emma felt sick as she realized what Dr. Ashford was suggesting. You made him watch you kill my mother. Amelia Reeves was collateral damage in a larger operation, Dr. Ashford replied without emotion. Your father needed to understand that his personal feelings couldn't be allowed to interfere with matters of national importance. Unfortunately, even watching his wife die wasn't sufficient motivation for him to return to the program. The casual way Dr. Ashford discussed her mother's murder filled Emma with a rage so intense that she could barely think clearly. These people hadn't just killed her parents. They had tortured her father by forcing him to witness her mother's death before eliminating him as well. Now you face the same choice, Dr. Ashford continued. Your technical knowledge and access to your father's documentation make you extremely valuable to our operations. Join us willingly, and Captain Rodriguez lives to see another day. Continue your resistance, and he becomes another lesson in the consequences of defying legitimate authority. Emma looked at Rodriguez, whose eyes conveyed both fear and determination. Even bound and helpless, he was shaking his head, silently urging her not to surrender to Dr. Ashford's demands. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Emma asked, stalling for time while she searched for any possible advantage in their situation. "Continue your father's work," Dr. Ashford replied. "The helicopter technology he developed 15 years ago is becoming obsolete. We need someone with his expertise to design next-generation systems that can operate in increasingly sophisticated defensive environments. Your inheritance includes not just his technical knowledge, but also his moral responsibility to serve your country's interests." Emma almost laughed at the audacity of Dr. Ashford's logic. The woman was asking her to help improve the weapons that had been used to murder her parents, framing it as patriotic duty rather than complicity in mass murder. "And if I refuse?" Dr. Ashford gestured toward Rodriguez with casual indifference. "Captain Rodriguez dies first, slowly and painfully, so you can understand the stakes involved. Then we move on to your neighbors, your high school teachers, anyone who ever showed you kindness during your childhood. The lesson continues until you demonstrate proper understanding of your situation." Emma realized that Dr. Ashford wasn't making empty threats. The scope of Operation Nightfall's targeting included anyone who might pose even a theoretical risk to the program's security. Refusing to cooperate wouldn't just cost Emma her own life. It would result in the systematic elimination of everyone she had ever cared about. "I need time to consider your offer," Emma said, hoping to delay the confrontation until she could find some advantage in their situation. "Time is a luxury we don't have," Dr. Ashford replied. "Steinberg's security breach has accelerated our timeline significantly. Every moment that classified information remains unsecured increases the risk of exposure to hostile foreign intelligence services." As if summoned by Dr. Ashford's words, the sound of approaching helicopters filled the air around the grain elevator. Through gaps in the rusted metal siding, Emma could see multiple aircraft circling the building in a coordinated search pattern. Her heart sank as she recognized the distinctive silhouette of the aircraft she had repaired just days earlier. "Ah, perfect timing," Dr. Ashford said with satisfaction. "Our recovery team has arrived to collect both you and the classified materials you obtained from Steinberg's vault. I trust you'll find their methods of persuasion more convincing than my diplomatic approach." Emma's mind raced as she calculated her rapidly diminishing options. The grain elevator was surrounded by hostile forces, Rodriguez was helpless to assist her, and Dr. Ashford seemed to hold all the advantages. But her father's training had taught her that desperate situations sometimes created unexpected opportunities. Sound of boots on metal announced the arrival of tactical teams entering the grain elevator from multiple access points. Emma could see laser sights pinking red dots on the walls around her as armed operatives took positions throughout the building. "Miss Reeves," a voice called through a loudspeaker, "you are surrounded and have no avenue of escape. Surrender the classified materials immediately, and no one needs to be harmed." Emma looked at Rodriguez one final time, seeing the same determination in his eyes that her father must have felt when he made his decision to resist Operation Nightfall. Some choices were worth making regardless of their consequences. She pulled out her phone and held it high enough for Dr. Ashford to see clearly. "I lied about uploading the files," Emma announced. "Everything is still right here on this device. But I did set up a dead man's switch. If I don't check in every 12 hours, the files get automatically transmitted to every major news organization in the world. Dr. Ashford's composed expression cracked slightly, revealing the first sign of genuine concern Emma had seen from her. You're bluffing. You wouldn't have had time to establish such elaborate safeguards. Emma smiled grimly. My father spent 15 years preparing for this moment. He taught me more about operational security than you might expect from a simple farm girl. The tactical teams were closing in from all directions, but Emma's revelation had clearly changed the dynamic of their confrontation. Dr. Ashford was no longer dealing with a helpless target. She was facing someone who might actually be capable of exposing the entire conspiracy. What do you want? Dr. Ashford asked her, voice tight with controlled frustration. I want the truth about Operation Nightfall, Emma replied. All of it, and I want Captain Rodriguez released unharmed. In exchange, I'll consider your offer to join the program. Dr. Ashford studied Emma's face carefully, searching for signs of deception or weakness. What she saw there must have convinced her that further threats would be counterproductive. Very well, Dr. Ashford said finally. But this conversation continues in a more secure location. You've earned the right to understand what your father was really trying to destroy. The helicopter that lifted Emma and Rodriguez from the grain elevator was identical to the one she had repaired days earlier, but the interior had been modified with restraint systems and electronic equipment that left no doubt about its true purpose. Dr. Ashford sat across from them with the calm confidence of someone who had orchestrated similar operations countless times, while armed operatives maintained constant surveillance to prevent any escape attempts. Where are you taking? U.S.? Rodriguez asked through swollen lips, his pilot's training evident in the way he automatically assessed the aircraft's flight path and altitude, despite his injuries. Somewhere you can learn the full scope of what you've stumbled into, Dr. Ashford replied, consulting a tablet that displayed what appeared to be real-time intelligence reports. The facility we're approaching has been the operational headquarters for projects far more significant than Operation Nightfall. Your father's helicopter technology was just the beginning, Miss Reeves. Emma watched the Montana landscape scroll past beneath them, noting landmarks that suggested they were flying toward the Canadian border. The remote location made sense for housing operations that required absolute secrecy, but it also meant that any rescue would be virtually impossible. She and Rodriguez were completely at the mercy of people who had already demonstrated their willingness to commit murder to protect their secrets. The helicopter began its descent toward what initially appeared to be an unremarkable stretch of wilderness, but as they drew closer, Emma could see the subtle signs of a massive underground complex. Camouflaged ventilation systems, discrete antenna arrays, and landing pads hidden beneath retractable forest canopies revealed the presence of a facility that dwarfed anything she had imagined. Welcome to Raven's Nest, Dr. Ashford announced, as they touched down on a platform that immediately began descending into the earth. This facility has been operational since 1987, serving as the coordination center for America's most sensitive national security programs. What you're about to see represents 35 years of technological development and strategic planning. The elevator platform descended through multiple levels of reinforced concrete and steel, passing blast doors and security checkpoints that would have been appropriate for a nuclear missile facility. Emma counted at least 8 distinct levels before they reached their destination in what must have been the deepest part of the complex. The corridors they walked through were bustling with activity that reminded Emma of news footage from NASA mission control centers. Dozens of technicians monitored banks of screens displaying satellite imagery, communication intercepts, and data streams from around the world. The scale of the operation was staggering, suggesting that Operation Nightfall was just one small component of a much larger surveillance and elimination network. Impressive, isn't it? Dr. Ashford said, noting Emma's amazement at the facility's scope. Most Americans believe that their intelligence agencies operate under congressional oversight and constitutional restraints. The reality is that threats to national security require responses that democratic institutions are simply too slow and too compromised to authorize. They passed through a security checkpoint where armed guards scanned identification cards and conducted biometric verification before allowing them to proceed deeper into the facility. Emma noticed that many of the personnel wore uniforms from different military branches and intelligence agencies, suggesting that Raven's Nest drew resources from across the entire national security apparatus. The beauty of our system, Dr. Ashford continued as they walked, is that it operates with complete deniability. Officially, this facility doesn't exist. The personnel assigned here are on indefinite classified deployment, and their activities are funded through black budget allocations that never appear in public records. Rodriguez caught Emma's eye and nodded slightly toward an emergency exit sign they had just passed. Even injured and restrained, he was thinking like a soldier, cataloging potential escape routes and defensive positions. But Emma could see from the facility's design that it had been built to prevent exactly the kind of escape they were contemplating. Dr. Ashford led them into a briefing room dominated by a massive display screen that showed a real-time map of the world dotted with thousands of colored indicators. Each dot represented an active operation, intelligence asset, or potential target in what appeared to be a global network of unprecedented scope and sophistication. Your father helped design the technical foundation for what you're seeing, Dr. Ashford explained, gesturing toward the display. But he lacked the vision to understand how his innovations could be scaled and integrated into a comprehensive solution for managing global threats to American interests. Emma stared at the display, horrified by the implications of what she was seeing. The colored dots weren't just scattered randomly. They formed patterns that suggested systematic surveillance and intervention operations on every continent. This wasn't national defense. It was global domination through technological superiority and targeted elimination. The helicopter technology was just the beginning, Dr. Ashford continued, using a laser pointer to highlight specific regions on the map. We've since developed autonomous systems that can operate underwater, in space, and in urban environments where traditional military assets would be impractical. Your father's engineering principles have been applied to create an entire ecosystem of weapons that can eliminate targets without leaving evidence of American involvement. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. A technician approached Dr. Ashford with a tablet displaying urgent information. After reviewing the data, her expression became more serious. It appears that someone has been making inquiries about Operation Nightfall through official channels, she announced. A congressional staffer has been asking questions about budget allocations and personnel assignments related to classified helicopter programs. Emma felt a flicker of hope. If someone in Congress was investigating Operation Nightfall, it might mean that exposure was possible even from within this underground fortress. But Dr. Ashford's next words crushed that optimism. Fortunately, Congressman Bradley is scheduled to experience a fatal heart attack during his morning jog tomorrow, Dr. Ashford said with casual indifference. His staff will be too busy dealing with the succession crisis to continue any inconvenient investigations. The matter-of-fact way she discussed assassinating a member of Congress made Emma realize that no one was beyond the reach of the conspiracy she had uncovered. Dr. Ashford's organization was prepared to eliminate anyone who threatened their operations, regardless of their position or public profile. You're talking about murdering an elected representative, Rodriguez said, his voice thick with disgust. How is that defending America? Dr. Ashford turned to face him with the patience of a teacher, explaining basic concepts to a slow student. Congressman Bradley has been interfering with programs designed to protect American lives and interests around the world. His misguided oversight activities would compromise operations that prevent terrorist attacks, nuclear proliferation, and economic warfare against our country. Sometimes protecting democracy requires making decisions that democratic institutions are too naive to make themselves. Emma saw the twisted logic that allowed Dr. Ashford to rationalize mass murder as patriotic duty. The conspiracy had convinced itself that it was above the law because it was protecting the law, creating a closed loop of justification that permitted any action in service of their perceived mission. "Now then," Dr. Ashford said, returning her attention to Emma, "let's discuss your role in continuing your father's work. The technical challenges we're facing require someone with his unique combination of engineering expertise and security clearance heritage." She gestured toward another section of the display screen, which showed technical diagrams of aircraft and weapons systems that looked decades ahead of anything Emma had seen in her father's manual. "We're developing next-generation systems, capable of operating in contested electromagnetic environments where current technology would be ineffective. The engineering principles your father established need to be adapted for quantum encrypted communication systems and artificial intelligence targeting protocols." Emma studied the technical specifications, recognizing elements of her father's work integrated into designs of staggering complexity and lethality. The weapons being developed at Raven's Nest weren't just improvements on existing technology. They represented a quantum leap in humanity's capacity for remote assassination and surveillance. "What makes you think I have the expertise to work on projects like this?" Emma asked, stalling for time while she searched for any possible advantage in their situation. "Your demonstration at Steinberg's facility proved that you inherited more than just your father's manual," Dr. Ashford replied. "The modifications you made to that helicopter went beyond simple repair work. You improved the fuel injection system, using principles that aren't documented in any civilian training program." Emma realized that her attempt to help Rodriguez had inadvertently revealed the depth of her technical knowledge. By demonstrating her ability to enhance military aircraft systems, she had proven that she possessed the engineering intuition that made her father so valuable to the conspiracy. "Your father spent years developing those insights," Dr. Ashford continued. "Before his unfortunate change of heart, he was considered the premier helicopter engineer in the world. The innovations he created formed the foundation for everything you see here." A new technician approached with another urgent report, this one causing Dr. Ashford's composed expression to shift toward concern. "Ma'am, we're detecting anomalous network activity in multiple sectors. Someone appears to be probing our communication protocols using advanced intrusion techniques." Dr. Ashford studied the report carefully before turning back to Emma with a new level of suspicion. "Miss Reeves, did you perhaps inherit more than engineering knowledge from your father? Did he teach you anything about computer security or information warfare?" Emma's mind raced as she realized what Dr. Ashford was suspecting. The network intrusions weren't random. They were targeted attempts to breach the facility's security systems. Someone was mounting a coordinated attack on Raven's Nest, and Dr. Ashford believed Emma might be involved. "I don't know anything about computer hacking," Emma replied truthfully. "I'm a wheat farmer who learned the basic mechanics from my father's manuals." But even as she spoke, Emma began to suspect who might be responsible for the cyber attacks. Her father's final note had mentioned finding Marcus Steinberg and asking him about Operation Nightfall. What if Steinberg wasn't just another conspirator? What if he had been trying to expose the program just as her father had? "The intrusions are becoming more sophisticated," the technician reported. "Whoever is behind this has intimate knowledge of our system architecture and security protocols. This isn't a random attack. It's a targeted operation by someone with extensive inside information." Dr. Ashford's eyes narrowed as she studied Emma's face for any sign of deception. Your father was always clever about creating contingency plans. Did he perhaps establish automated systems that would activate if certain conditions were met? Emma's heart pounded as she realized that Dr. Ashford might be right. Her father could have spent 15 years preparing for this moment, developing cyber weapons that would activate when his daughter finally discovered the truth about Operation Nightfall. The network attacks might be his final gift to her, a chance to strike back at the conspiracy that had destroyed their family. Security breach in Section 7, another technician announced urgently. Someone has gained unauthorized access to the classified project databases. All sensitive files are being copied and transmitted to external servers. Dr. Ashford's composed facade finally cracked as she realized that her supposedly secure facility was being systematically compromised. Lock down all external communications, she ordered. Initiate emergency containment protocols and prepare for immediate facility evacuation. Emma felt a surge of hope as alarms began wailing throughout the underground complex. Whatever her father had planned was working, and the conspiracy that had seemed untouchable just moments earlier was suddenly fighting for its survival. She also knew that desperate enemies were the most dangerous, and Dr. Ashford's next words confirmed her worst fears. "If we can't maintain operational security," Dr. Ashford said coldly, "then we'll have to eliminate all potential sources of information leakage. That includes both of you." The alarms echoing through Raven's Nest grew more urgent as Emma watched. Dr. Ashford transformed from composed administrator to cornered predator. The cyber attack that was systematically dismantling the facility's security systems had clearly triggered contingency plans that Emma's father had spent 15 years perfecting. Through the chaos of flashing warning lights and running technicians, she caught glimpses of computer screens displaying cascading system failures as decades of classified information hemorrhaged into the outside world. "Initiate Scorpion Protocol," Dr. Ashford commanded into her radio, her voice cutting through the mechanical wailing of the emergency systems. "Authorization code Alpha 77 Omega. Execute immediate sanitization of all Level 5 assets and personnel." Emma's blood ran cold as she understood the implications of Dr. Ashford's order. Scorpion Protocol wasn't just about destroying evidence. It was about eliminating everyone who had knowledge of the facility's operations. The people running through the corridors weren't just responding to a security breach. They were about to become victims of their own organization's paranoid contingency. Planning. Rodriguez caught Emma's eye and nodded toward a maintenance access panel that had been left open during the evacuation chaos. His military training was evident in the way he assessed their tactical situation despite his injuries, calculating angles and distances with the precision of someone who had survived combat operations. Even restrained and wounded, he was thinking like a soldier preparing for a desperate breakout attempt. "The beautiful irony," Dr. Ashford said, raising her voice above the alarms, "is that your father's final revenge will accomplish exactly what we've been working toward for 35 years. When the evidence of Operation Nightfall becomes public, it will trigger a national security crisis that justifies the implementation of martial law protocols we've been developing since the Cold War." Emma stared at Dr. Ashford in horror as she understood the true scope of the conspiracy. The exposure of Operation Nightfall wasn't an unintended consequence. It was part of a larger plan to justify the expansion of extrajudicial authority beyond anything previously imagined. Her father's cyber weapons weren't just revealing the truth. They were providing the pretext for an authoritarian takeover of American democracy. "You wanted this to happen," Emma realized. "You've been planning for Operation Nightfall to be exposed because it would give you the excuse to implement something even worse." Dr. Ashford's smile was triumphant despite the chaos surrounding them. "Your father was always too focused on individual morality to understand strategic necessity. The American people will never voluntarily surrender the freedoms that make them vulnerable to modern threats. But when they see evidence of the dangers we've been protecting them from, they'll beg us to implement the security measures that democracy has prevented us from establishing. The maintenance access panel Rodriguez had been watching suddenly burst open, revealing Marcus Steinberg wielding an assault rifle and wearing tactical gear that made him look like a completely different person from the frustrated CEO who had landed in Emma's wheat field. His eyes were hard with the focus of someone who had spent years preparing for this moment, and his movements carried the precision of military training that had been carefully concealed beneath his corporate facade. "Victoria, you always were too fond of hearing yourself talk," Steinberg said, his weapon trained on Dr. Ashford with steady competence. "Emma, Rodriguez, get behind me and stay low. We're leaving this place before the self-destruct charges turn it into a crater." Emma's mind reeled as she tried to process this latest revelation. Marcus Steinberg wasn't just another conspirator in Operation Nightfall. He was apparently working to expose and destroy the very program she had believed he was leading. His helicopter's emergency landing at her farm hadn't been coincidental. It had been a deliberate attempt to make contact with Jonathan Reeves' daughter. "Marcus, how touching," Dr. Ashford said with cold amusement. "The prodigal operative returns to save the day. Did you really think I hadn't anticipated your sentimental attachment to your old partner's daughter?" Steinberg's expression hardened at the mention of Emma's father. "Jonathan was worth 10 of you, Victoria. When he tried to expose Operation Nightfall, you didn't just kill him. You tortured him by making him watch Amelia die first. That was unnecessary cruelty, even by your standards." Emma gasped as another piece of the puzzle fell into place. Marcus Steinberg hadn't been her father's enemy. He had been his partner in trying to expose the conspiracy. His corporate identity was as much of a cover story as her father's farming background, designed to provide access to the resources needed to bring down Operation Nightfall from within. "The cyber attack," Emma said suddenly. "You're the one who's been breaking into their systems." Steinberg nodded grimly while keeping his weapon focused on Dr. Ashford. "Your father and I spent years developing contingency plans for exposing Raven's Nest if something happened to either of us. When I saw that birthmark while you were repairing my helicopter, I knew Jonathan's daughter had survived. It was time to activate everything we'd prepared." Dr. Ashford laughed with genuine amusement. "And now you've triggered the very response we wanted. In 6 hours, every major news organization in the world will be broadcasting evidence of Operation Nightfall's existence. The public will be terrified by the scope of the threats we've been protecting them from, and Congress will have no choice but to authorize the emergency powers we need to implement proper security measures." Emma realized that they were trapped in a scenario where every action seemed to advance Dr. Ashford's agenda. Exposing Operation Nightfall would create the crisis that justified expanding the conspiracy's authority, but allowing it to continue. Operating meant accepting the systematic murder of innocent people around the world. "There's a third option," Steinberg said, apparently reading Emma's thoughts. "We destroy Raven's Nest completely, eliminate the leadership structure of the conspiracy, and release enough evidence to prosecute the survivors without creating the kind of national panic that justifies martial law." He gestured toward the maintenance tunnel he had emerged from. Jonathan's final gift wasn't just cyber weapons. It was detailed intelligence about every black site facility, every funding source, and every political connection that keeps this organization operational. "We can bring down the entire network if we move fast enough." Dr. Ashford's confident expression flickered for the first time as she realized that Steinberg might actually be capable of destroying everything she had spent decades building. "You're bluffing, Marcus. Even if you had such intelligence, releasing it would expose legitimate national security operations along with our activities." "That's a price I'm willing to pay," Steinberg replied. "Democracy dies when people like you decide that protecting it requires destroying it." Jonathan understood that, even if it cost him everything. The sound of approaching boots echoed through the corridors as Dr. Ashford's security teams responded to the containment breach. Steinberg motioned urgently for Emma and Rodriguez to follow him toward the maintenance tunnel, but Dr. Ashford's next words stopped them cold. "The self-destruct sequence is already active," she announced with calm satisfaction. "In 30 minutes, this entire facility will be vaporized by nuclear charges that will leave a crater visible from orbit. You can try to escape through the tunnels, but the blast radius extends for miles in every direction." Emma felt her hope crumbling as she understood the magnitude of Dr. Ashford's final contingency plan. Even if they could escape from Raven's Nest, they would still be within the lethal range of a nuclear explosion designed to eliminate all evidence of the facility's existence. "There's still time to reach minimum safe distance," Steinberg said, but his voice carried doubt about their chances of covering enough ground in the time remaining. "The tunnel system extends beyond the primary blast radius, but we'll have to move faster than we've ever moved before." Rodriguez struggled to his feet despite his injuries, determination overriding the pain of his earlier beating. "I've been through worse extractions in Afghanistan. Let's move." As they prepared to enter the maintenance tunnel, Dr. Ashford called out one final taunt. "Even if you survive the blast, Marcus, you'll spend the rest of your life as a fugitive. The evidence you're releasing will be dismissed as terrorist propaganda, and the crisis will still justify everything we've planned. You're not saving democracy. You're just ensuring that its transition to proper authority will be more chaotic than necessary." Steinberg paused at the tunnel entrance, his expression reflecting the weight of impossible choices. "Maybe," he admitted, "but at least Emma will know the truth about her parents, and Rodriguez will have the chance to testify about what he's seen. Sometimes that's the best you can hope for." The maintenance tunnel was a nightmare of cramped spaces and industrial hazards that forced them to crawl through sections barely wide enough for a human body. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter as Dr. Ashford's security teams focused on their own evacuation rather than chasing fugitives into a tunnel system that would be vaporized along with everything else. "How far to safety?" Emma gasped, as they navigated a particularly narrow section filled with steam pipes that radiated dangerous levels of heat. 2 miles minimum, Steinberg replied, consulting a handheld GPS device that somehow maintained satellite connection despite their underground location. "We've covered maybe half a mile, and we have 23 minutes until detonation." Rodriguez was struggling to maintain their pace, his injuries making the physical demands of the escape nearly impossible. Emma could see blood seeping through his improvised bandages, and his breathing was becoming increasingly labored. "Leave me behind," Rodriguez said during a brief rest stop, his military training evident in his willingness to sacrifice himself for the mission. "You two can move faster without carrying dead weight." "Not happening," Emma replied firmly. "We all get out together, or we don't get out at all." Steinberg consulted his GPS again, his expression grim. "There's an emergency exit about 3/4 of a mile ahead that opens into a natural cave system. If we can reach it, we might be far enough underground to survive the blast even if we're still within the surface damage radius." They continued their desperate crawl through the tunnel system, racing against time while fighting exhaustion and the growing certainty that they might not escape the facility's final solution. Emma's hands were raw from scraping against concrete and metal, and her lungs burned from breathing air thick with industrial fumes and dust. Behind them, a series of smaller explosions suggested that Raven's Nest was systematically destroying its own infrastructure to ensure that nothing useful would survive the nuclear blast. Dr. Ashford was clearly determined to leave no evidence that could be analyzed by investigators, even if it meant killing everyone who had ever worked in the facility. "Emergency exit ahead," Steinberg announced, pointing toward a section of the tunnel where rusty metal ladder rungs were bolted to the concrete wall. This should open into natural cave formation that extends deep enough to provide some protection from the surface blast. Emma helped Rodriguez climb the ladder while Steinberg worked to open the heavy steel door that sealed the emergency exit. The mechanism was corroded with years of disuse, but desperation gave him the strength to force it open despite the resistance. Beyond the door lay a natural cave system that stretched into darkness far beyond the range of their flashlights. The rocky formation looked ancient and stable, offering the possibility of survival if they could penetrate deep enough into the underground labyrinth before the nuclear charges detonated. 15 minutes, Steinberg announced as they began their final desperate retreat into the caves. Whether we live or die, at least the truth about Operation Nightfall will survive. The cave system stretched deeper into the earth than Emma had imagined possible. Its limestone walls carved by millennia of underground water flow into chambers and passages that seemed to extend forever into absolute darkness. Their flashlights created dancing shadows that made the rocky formations look like frozen monsters, watching their desperate flight from the nuclear destruction preparing to erase Raven's Nest from existence. Rodriguez was barely conscious now, his injuries and exhaustion combining to make each step a monumental effort, but he refused to give up even as blood continued to seep through his makeshift bandages. How much deeper do we need to go? Emma asked Steinberg as they half-carried Rodriguez through a narrow passage that forced them to move in single file. The weight of thousands of tons of rock above them was oppressive, but it also represented their only hope of surviving the nuclear blast that would soon turn the surface into a radioactive wasteland. Steinberg consulted his radiation detector, a military-grade device that he had apparently been carrying as part of his infiltration equipment. The readings suggest we need at least another 1,000 feet of rock between us and the surface to have any chance of survival. These natural limestone formations should provide adequate shielding if we can get deep enough. Behind them, the tunnel they had escaped through was now sealed by emergency blast doors that Dr. Ashford had activated as part of Raven's Nest's final security protocol. Even if they wanted to return to the facility, there was no longer any way to reach it through the underground passages. Their only option was to continue descending into the cave system and hope that the Earth itself would protect them from the Holocaust above. 10 minutes until detonation, Steinberg announced, his voice echoing strangely in the underground chamber they had just entered. The space was vast enough that their flashlights couldn't illuminate the far walls, and the sound of dripping water suggested the presence of underground streams that had been carving these passages for geological ages. Emma helped Rodriguez sit against a large boulder while she examined their surroundings more carefully. The cave chamber showed signs of previous human occupation, with carved symbols on the walls that looked Native American in origin. Stone circles marked where ancient fires had burned, and pictographs depicted hunting scenes and ceremonial gatherings that had taken place in this sacred space long before the modern world existed above. This place has been a refuge before, Emma observed, pointing out the historical evidence around them. People have hidden here when their world was being destroyed. Rodriguez managed a weak smile despite his pain. Appropriate symbolism for the end of American democracy, he said. At least we're dying in a place with historical significance. Steinberg was busy with his electronic equipment, setting up what appeared to be a communication array despite their location deep underground. We're not dead yet, he said grimly, and there's still work to do before the blast hits. Emma watched him connect cables between his handheld devices and a larger piece of equipment that looked like a military radio modified with civilian electronics. What are you doing? We're too deep underground for any normal communications to work. Your father designed this system, Steinberg explained as he adjusted frequency settings with practiced precision. It uses extremely low-frequency radio waves that can penetrate rock formations and connect to satellite networks through relay stations he positioned around the country. This might be our last chance to transmit the final piece of evidence about Operation Nightfall. Emma's heart raced as she understood what Steinberg was attempting. Even if they died in the nuclear blast, the information her father had gathered about the conspiracy could still reach the outside world and expose the truth about the assassination program that had destroyed so many lives. The cyber attack on Raven's Nest was just the beginning, Steinberg continued as he worked. Jonathan programmed multiple phases of revelation that would activate sequentially to prevent the kind of controlled narrative that Dr. Ashford is hoping to create. When the news media gets this final data package, they'll have enough evidence to prosecute the entire leadership structure of the conspiracy. Rodriguez struggled to sit up straighter, his military training evident in his determination to remain functional despite his injuries. What about the martial law scenario? Won't exposing Operation Nightfall still give them the crisis they need to justify emergency powers? Steinberg shook his head as he completed his equipment setup. Jonathan was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. The evidence package includes detailed documentation of their plan to use the exposure of Operation Nightfall as justification for implementing authoritarian controls. When people see that the crisis was deliberately engineered to destroy democratic institutions, they'll reject the proposed solutions. Emma felt a surge of pride in her father's strategic thinking. Even facing death, he had continued planning for scenarios that would preserve the democratic values he believed in. His final gift wasn't just revenge against the people who had murdered him. It was a comprehensive strategy for protecting the country he had served. 5 minutes until detonation, Steinberg announced as his communication equipment came online. The transmission will take about 3 minutes to complete, so we should have just enough time if the nuclear blast doesn't interfere with the satellite connections. Emma watched data indicators on Steinberg's equipment showing the upload progress of what appeared to be massive files containing years of accumulated evidence about Operation Nightfall and the broader conspiracy it represented. Names, dates, financial records, assassination targets, and operational details were streaming through the underground communication system her father had spent years perfecting. "There's something else you should know," Steinberg said as the transmission continued. "Your father didn't just document Operation Nightfall's crimes. He identified every person involved in the conspiracy at every level. Government officials, military officers, corporate executives, foreign intelligence assets. Everyone who participated in or enabled the assassination program is named in these files." Emma realized that her father's evidence would destroy not just Dr. Ashford's organization, but the entire network of corruption that had made Operation Nightfall possible. Politicians who had provided funding, generals who had supplied personnel, judges who had covered up investigations, journalists who had suppressed stories. All of them would be exposed when the files reached the outside world. "The transmission is almost complete," Steinberg reported as he monitored the upload progress. 95% of the data package has been successfully transmitted to news organizations in 17 countries. Even if they try to suppress the story in America, international media will ensure that the truth becomes public. Rodriguez was struggling to remain conscious, but he managed to focus on Steinberg with obvious effort. What happens to the families of everyone involved in Operation Nightfall? The innocent spouses and children who didn't know what their relatives were doing? Emma was touched by Rodriguez's concern for collateral victims, even in their desperate situation. His military background had taught him to think about the human cost of operations, and he was worried about the consequences for people who hadn't chosen to be involved in the conspiracy. "Jonathan thought about that too," Steinberg replied. "The evidence package includes detailed recommendations for how to handle prosecutions and asset seizures to minimize harm to innocent family members." He wanted justice, not indiscriminate revenge. The communication equipment showed completion of the data transmission, just as a deep rumbling began to resonate through the cave system. The nuclear blast was still too far away for them to feel its direct effects, but the seismic shock waves were beginning to propagate through the rock formations that surrounded them. "It's done," Steinberg announced with quiet satisfaction. "The truth about Operation Nightfall is now in the hands of people who can ensure it reaches the public. Whatever happens to us, your parents' deaths will finally be avenged." Emma felt the cave floor vibrating beneath her feet as the shock waves intensified. Dust and small rocks began falling from the ceiling, and she could hear the sound of underground streams changing course as the seismic activity disrupted the cave system's natural hydrology. "How long do we have to wait before we know if we've survived?" she asked, helping Rodriguez brace himself against the increasing vibrations. "The worst of the shock waves should pass within 10 minutes, Steinberg replied, securing his equipment against the seismic disturbance. "If the cave system remains stable and we don't get trapped by rockfalls, we should be able to begin working our way toward the surface in about an hour." Emma thought about the world they would emerge into if they survived. The evidence her father had compiled would create a political earthquake that would make the nuclear blast seem minor by comparison. Governments would fall, military leaders would be court-martialed, and the intelligence apparatus that had operated in secret for decades would be forced into the light of public scrutiny. "There will be chaos," she said, voicing her concerns about the aftermath of such massive revelations. "When people learn the scope of what's been done in their name, they might lose faith in all government institutions." Rodriguez managed a weak laugh despite his pain. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing. Institutions that can be corrupted this completely might need to be rebuilt from scratch." Steinberg nodded agreement as he monitored radiation levels on his detection equipment. Democracy has survived crises before by adapting and reforming itself. The American people are stronger than the conspiracy gave them credit for. They'll find ways to rebuild accountability and transparency into their government. The seismic vibrations reached their peak intensity, causing sections of the cave ceiling to crack and shower them with limestone fragments. Emma pressed herself against the rock wall while protecting Rodriguez from falling debris, wondering if they would survive the Earth's violent reaction to the nuclear destruction above them. "Radiation levels are spiking," Steinberg reported with concern. "The blast was larger than I expected, and some contamination is penetrating deeper into the cave system than our calculations predicted." Emma felt a chill of fear as she understood what Steinberg was telling them. Even if they survived the immediate effects of the nuclear blast, radiation exposure might kill them slowly over the following days or weeks. Her father's final victory might come at the cost of her own life and the lives of everyone who had helped expose the conspiracy. "How bad is it?" Rodriguez asked, his military training evident in his direct approach to assessing their tactical situation. Steinberg studied his instruments carefully before responding. "Bad enough that we'll need medical treatment as soon as possible if we want to survive long term, but not so bad that we're going to die immediately. We still have time to get out of here and find help." Emma realized that their ordeal was far from over. Escaping from Raven's Nest had been just the beginning of a journey that would require them to navigate radiation exposure, potential pursuit by surviving conspiracy members, and the chaos that would ensue when her father's evidence became public. "The shock waves are beginning to subside," Steinberg observed as the cave system stabilized around them. "I think we're going to make it through the initial blast phase." Emma helped Rodriguez to his feet as they prepared to begin the long journey back to the surface. Behind them lay the radioactive crater that had once been Raven's Nest, along with Dr. Ashford and everyone else who had been involved in Operation Nightfall's leadership. Ahead lay an uncertain world where the truth her father had died to preserve would finally see the light of day. But first, they had to survive long enough to witness the justice they had fought so hard to achieve, the journey back to the surface. Took 6 grueling hours through cave passages that had been altered by the seismic activity from the nuclear blast. Emma's radiation detector, borrowed from Steinberg's equipment, clicked ominously as they climbed toward daylight, but the levels remained within survivable ranges as long as they didn't linger in the contaminated zones. Rodriguez had regained some strength during their underground rest, though he still needed support to navigate the more treacherous sections of their ascent. When they finally emerged from a cave opening, hidden among pine trees 20 miles from the former location of Raven's Nest, the world above looked deceptively normal. Birds sang in the branches overhead, and afternoon sunlight filtered through the forest canopy as if nothing had changed. Only the faint haze on the distant horizon and the occasional rumble of military aircraft suggested that anything unusual had occurred. "Look," Rodriguez said, pointing toward the sky where a formation of helicopters was conducting search patterns in the distance. "Someone's looking for survivors." Steinberg checked his secure phone, which had automatically reconnected to satellite networks as soon as they reached the surface. His expression grew serious as he read the messages that had accumulated during their underground ordeal. "The story broke 3 hours ago," he announced. "Every major news network in the world is running continuous coverage of Operation Nightfall. The evidence your father compiled is being called the biggest intelligence leak in history." Emma felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and apprehension as she contemplated the magnitude of what they had unleashed. Her parents' murders would finally be avenged, but the political earthquake that followed might reshape American society in ways that were impossible to predict. "What's the public reaction?" she asked as they began hiking toward the nearest road, where Steinberg hoped to make contact with allies who could provide medical treatment and protection. Steinberg scrolled through news reports on his phone as they walked. Massive protests in Washington demanding congressional investigations. The president has called an emergency session of Congress to address the crisis. Several high-ranking military officers have already been arrested, and more are expected to follow. Rodriguez managed a grim smile despite his exhaustion. "Sounds like democracy might survive after all." They reached a rural highway just as a convoy of unmarked vehicles approached from the east. Emma's first instinct was to hide, remembering Dr. Ashford's warnings about the conspiracy's reach. But Steinberg waved confidently as the lead vehicle pulled over. "Friends of your father," he explained as armed men in civilian clothes emerged from the vehicles. Jonathan spent years building a network of people inside the intelligence community who were waiting for the right moment to act against the conspiracy. Team leader, a woman in her 40s with the bearing of a senior military officer, approached them with obvious relief. "Mr. Steinberg, we've been searching for survivors since the blast. Medical teams are standing by to treat radiation exposure." Emma found herself in the back of an armored ambulance racing toward a private medical facility where doctors immediately began administering treatments designed to counteract the effects of their radiation exposure. As 4 tubes delivered chelation, therapy to remove radioactive particles from her bloodstream, she watched news coverage of the global response to Operation Nightfall's exposure. The scope of the revelations was staggering. Her father's evidence had documented assassination operations on every continent, involving hundreds of targets and billions of dollars in illegal funding. Government officials in 17 countries were facing criminal charges, and international courts were preparing war crimes prosecutions against American citizens involved in the conspiracy. "The beautiful irony," Dr. Sarah Chun, the physician treating Emma, observed as she monitored the news coverage, is that Dr. Ashford's plan to use the crisis for authoritarian purposes completely backfired. Instead of demanding more security, people are demanding more transparency and accountability. Emma learned that massive crowds had surrounded government buildings in Washington, London, Berlin, and other capitals, demanding immediate reforms to prevent future conspiracies, rather than the fear and chaos that Dr. Ashford had predicted. The revelations had sparked a global movement for democratic renewal and intelligence oversight. 3 weeks later, Emma stood before a joint session of Congress, providing testimony about her experiences with Operation Nightfall. The hearing room was packed with journalists, lawmakers, and family members of the conspiracy's victims, all seeking answers about how such a massive criminal enterprise had operated for decades without detection. My father, Jonathan Reeves, believed that democracy could only survive if citizens knew the truth about what was being done in their name. Emma testified, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of her words. He died protecting that principle, and his sacrifice has given us the opportunity to rebuild trust between the American people and their government. Rodriguez, recovered from his injuries and wearing his military dress uniform, testified about the specific operations he had witnessed and the systematic nature of the assassination program. His credibility as a decorated veteran gave additional weight to the evidence that was already overwhelming. Marcus Steinberg had been granted immunity in exchange for his cooperation with multiple investigations. His testimony revealed the financial networks that had funded Operation Nightfall and identified corporate executives who had profited from the conspiracy's activities. The congressional hearings continued for months, but their immediate impact was transformative. New oversight mechanisms were established for intelligence operations, and legislation was passed requiring real-time congressional notification of any covert programs involving lethal force. Emma used her portion of the settlements from civil lawsuits against Steinberg, Dynamics, and other conspiracy-connected corporations to establish the Jonathan and Amelia Reeves Foundation for Government Transparency. The organization provided legal support for whistleblowers and maintained databases of declassified government documents to ensure that future conspiracies would be more difficult to conceal. The foundation's headquarters was built on the site of Emma's family farm in Montana, transformed from a place of secrets into a center for democratic accountability. The helicopter landing pad where Marcus Steinberg had first made contact with her became a memorial garden honoring all the victims of Operation Nightfall's assassination campaigns. On the 5th anniversary of her parents' deaths, Emma stood in that memorial garden addressing the gathering of transparency advocates, investigative journalists, and family members of conspiracy victims. Rodriguez, now serving as the foundation's director of security, and Steinberg, who had become a leading advocate for intelligence reform, flanked her at the podium. The lesson of Operation Nightfall, Emma told the assembled crowd, isn't that our democratic institutions are fundamentally flawed. It's that democracy requires constant vigilance from ordinary citizens who refuse to accept that secrecy and security are more important than truth and justice. She gestured toward the memorial wall behind her, which displayed photographs of journalists, activists, and government officials who had been murdered by the conspiracy. These people died because they believed that sunlight was the best disinfectant for corruption. Their sacrifice reminds us that freedom isn't free, but it also isn't beyond the reach of ordinary people who have the courage to seek the truth. The audience erupted in applause, but Emma's mind was already focused on the future challenges facing democratic societies around the world. Operation Nightfall had been destroyed, but the impulses that created it, the desire for unaccountable power and the willingness to sacrifice democratic values for perceived security remained present in every generation. As the ceremony concluded and guests mingled in the memorial garden, Emma reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. Since that afternoon when a helicopter had made an emergency landing in her wheat field, she had begun that day as a simple farmer struggling to make ends meet, unaware that her true identity was connected to one of the most significant conspiracies in modern history. Now she was a public figure whose testimony had helped reshape American intelligence oversight and whose foundation was working to prevent future abuses of government power. The girl who had grown up believing she was an orphan had discovered not only her true parentage but also her responsibility to continue her father's fight for democratic accountability. The transformation hadn't been without costs. Emma lived with security protection due to ongoing threats from surviving conspiracy members, and the radiation exposure from Raven's Nest had required years of medical treatment. But she had also gained something precious, the knowledge that her parents had died as heroes rather than victims, and that their sacrifice had made a difference in protecting the democratic values they believed in. As sunset painted the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, Emma walked among the Memorial Gardens pathways, reading the names of people who had given their lives for truth and justice. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in the ongoing struggle to maintain democratic accountability, but tonight she could take satisfaction in knowing that her father's legacy was secure, the helicopter manual that had started her journey toward the truth now resided in the Smithsonian Institution, displayed alongside other artifacts from pivotal moments in American history. Visitors could read Jonathan Reeves' handwritten notes and understand how one engineer's conscience had helped expose a conspiracy that threatened the foundations of democratic government. Emma's story had become a reminder that extraordinary courage could emerge from ordinary circumstances, and that the most powerful weapons against tyranny were often simple tools like truthful testimony and documentary evidence. In a world where technology made surveillance and assassination easier than ever before, the example of a farm girl who refused to accept convenient lies offered hope that democracy could survive and adapt to new challenges. The fight for truth and accountability would continue long after Emma's generation passed from the scene. But Operation Nightfall's exposure had established principles and precedents that would make future conspiracies more difficult to sustain. The price of freedom was eternal vigilance, but that vigilance was most effective when ordinary citizens understood that they had both the power and the responsibility to hold their government accountable to democratic values. If this story of courage, conspiracy, and the triumph of truth over power has moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What would you have done if you'd discovered that photograph in a stranger's mansion? How far would you go to expose dangerous secrets that powerful people want to keep hidden? Your engagement helps us continue bringing you these compelling stories of ordinary people who find themselves in extraordinary circumstances. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. We have more incredible true stories of mystery, courage, and justice waiting for you right here on your screen. Until next time, remember that the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep some people try to bury it.